Hello, and welcome to the AAA 2020 Raising Our Voices presentation called Communicating in Place about Planetary Health and Justice. My name is Kate Riley. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm white with graying long hair and dark rimmed glasses. Behind me is a sketch of my daughter done years ago and a painting of flowers and rainbows she did at the age of 5.
Hi, my name is Riley-Shepard. My pronouns are also she, her, hers. And I'm the aforementioned daughter, now all grown up, with blonde hair and a black shirt in front of a white wall. As a note, our presentation contains no sensitive materials aside from raising topics of distress for many of us, such as planetary imbalance and social injustice. Our collaborative fieldwork began as a search for new means of communion during COVID-19. Since March 2020, we've been conducting multi-sited autoethnography as an interdisciplinary mother-daughter team. Kate's a linguistic anthropologist who's been based in the Marquesas, France, and Vermont during this time, and I'm an embodied neuroecologist, and I've been based in Amsterdam, France, and Vermont. Together, we've asked some rather idealistic research questions. How do we stay in touch? Can we cure the world? And what framework might help us do both these things? But before we dive into our framework, we'll give a little insight into the converging pathways that influenced our thinking.
So I've researched food and language socialization in French Polynesia, France, and New York City for quite a few years. I began this research with the understanding that food functions indexically, both reflecting our identities and forging our relationships. This is made possible by the fact that food fulfills material biological needs as well as emotional, social, spiritual desires. On the one hand, bodies depend on consuming basic nutrients in healthy combinations. And on the other, spirits thrive on experiences of safety and familiarity, as well as on variation and change. The former translates, for instance, into comfort foods, and the latter into gastrotourism. Humans also learn to communicate in social groups organized around the production, exchange, and consumption of food. Whether foraging in nomadic bands or processing meat for urbanized nation states, we learn through interaction around food in gardens and kitchens, at ritual feasts and business lunches. So out of this research trajectory, I developed the conviction that healthy, sustainable, just, and meaningful foodways could be socialized via communicative reciprocity through, about, around, and as food. Communicating reciprocity with food involves sharing our meaningful foods and nourishing forms of expression with others, as well as sampling theirs with respect. Expressing food thanks to our gods, family, friends, and essential workers. Learning and teaching to garden, cook, eat, and compost sustainably, and amplifying the food sovereignty of local communities. Personally, I began to look for ways to do food interactivism, which I understood as a form of participatory research in which we listen dialogically to how others are successfully engaging in communicating reciprocity with food in ways that restore personhood, relationships, communities, and the planet.
Meanwhile, I've been on a lifelong adventure to understand how we relate to ourselves, each other, and the world. I've approached it through various disciplines, including dance, neuroscience, and strategic communication, and in various locations, including Vermont, New York City, Harvard, Sicily, and Amsterdam. Dance, which is relating through movement, taught me that communication is a loop that begins with listening. I grounded my study of this attention expression loop in the brain while at Harvard, focusing on expertise-mediated states of effortless attentional control. I then moved to Amsterdam and got a job at a branding agency, where I learned the art of strategic communication to make my knowledge of human behavior accessible on a societal scale. And finally, I brought my skill sets to bear on the climate and ecological crisis, itself a global relational issue. My lens showed me how natural ecosystems are themselves communicating communities that we humans have forgotten how to be a part of, resulting in a warped relationality of intersectional extraction and objectification instead of care. All this brought me to a new starting point, that our bodies, brains, communities, societies, and natural environments are all highly complex and interrelated ecosystems dependent on functioning communication. We know communication as an exchange of information, but as an embodied neuroecologist, I'm interested in how communication actually physically moves. It moves through the transfer of fluids, in plants' water, our blood and sweat, through heat, the sun's warmth signaling growth, the heat of touch signaling human contact, through chemicals transferred as ions, scents, pheromones, and hormones of stress or pleasure, through electrical pulses sent among our neurons and cells or our computer's binary switches, and through waves propagating energy through time and space, brain waves to think, sound waves to speak and listen, light waves to see, radio and Wi-Fi waves to connect virtually, and even microwaves to change the molecular constellations of our food from cold to hot. So, if our social health and environmental crises are semiotic, then they are also kinetic. They are also about a loss of self contextualized in one's place ecosystem. So I ask, how can movement and neuroscience help us resituate or reground ourselves in our social and environmental ecosystems?
So out of our life and work entanglements, and in this moment of pandemic threat, Anna and I have developed a framework to think and act with, which we refer to as the semiotics of planetary health and justice. On this first slide, you see just the bare triangular outline of the theoretical model, which we conceptualize as a web of systems threaded together by semiotic chains of signs and interpretations that allow for destructive miscommunications and abuses of power on the one hand, as well as creative transformations and multi-beneficial ways forward on the other. So to begin, we will sketch out the forms of semiosis that undergird this model. This slide shows diagrams of two seminal models of semiosis. Saussure's structural model is represented as a single vertical axis, linking the signified and signifier in a fixed feedback loop that assures idealized speaker-hearer comprehension, as well as societal reproduction. By contrast, Peirce's systemic model, represented here as a semiotic triangle with an exit ramp, pokes holes in Saussure's semiotic certainty by proposing that the hearer does not necessarily interpret the sign as the speaker intended, but instead constructs a new object in the world, thus instigating miscommunications in the signifying chain, which propel social transformation, but not necessarily in any positive direction. So this next slide offers a more hopeful rendering of semiosis, inspired by Bakhtin. Here, the listening subject sits at the center of a two-way spiral in which traces of past semiosis are taken in prior to speaking out new forms that can be taken up by other similarly sensitized subjects. Here, social change is motivated less by a chain of inevitably destructive miscommunications, but also by some dialogic moments of creative praxis. Keeping all that in mind, we now turn to explaining the planetary health and model triangle, all filled in now as a system of semiotically intertwined systems. Please remember that each of the systems are not only internally woven together via semiosis, but are also interwoven with each other and other systems via signs and dialogic nodes of interpretation.
The three basic systems of the model are represented at the three angles of the triangle: the human body health medical, the ecological, and the socio-political economic. An example of semiotics within the human body health system is how our cells communicate through signaling carbon isotopes, enabling proper cell regeneration, while lack thereof leads to disease. In the ecological system, mycorrhizal fungi serve as communicative networks for plants to exchange nutrients with underground microbial communities. This network makes or breaks soil health and its ability to sequester carbon, store water, and regulate air temperatures. In the socio-political economic system, we see that communities celebrating multilingual and multimodal forms of communication are more resilient and better reject structural violences that thrive on categorical stereotypes. So where these three systems meet, they produce three interfaces: planetary health at the interface of human body health and ecological, environmental justice at the interface of ecological and socio-political economic, and global health at the interface of socio-political economic and human body health. An example of a breakdown at the planetary health interface looks like when environmental degradation allows for new pathogens to emerge and human incursion on natural areas through development or wet markets allows pathogens to jump from animal to human hosts. A breakdown at the environmental justice interface looks like marginalized peoples being disproportionately affected by environmental degradation and climate-induced disasters, from polluted air and water to hurricanes. And a breakdown at the global health interface is when Black, Indigenous, and people of color are at higher risk of dying from chronic preventable diseases, such as cardiovascular illness or diabetes, due to unequal access to healthcare and nutritious food.
So finally, in this slide, we show how a central node that operates at the interface of planetary health, environmental justice, and global health manifests highly complex intersectional problems and opportunities for systemic change. One clear example is the present COVID-19 pandemic, which scientists are labeling a syndemic because of the systemic ways in which environmental degradation, globalized inequities, and underfunded public health have interacted to create an unprecedented disaster that could have been avoided partially or completely. For the sake of analysis, we've inserted the term cures in scare quotes to indicate how frequently actors jump to destructive quick fixes at moments such as these without first analyzing the array of systemic factors involved and thus the best ways to find multi-beneficial solutions. And so with this slide, we've used an infinity sign to visualize how we might spin interactive research goals out of the planetary health and justice framework. First, we seek out the semiotic threads that animate our bodies, societies, and planet. Then we trace how intersystemic harm is unleashed and circulated. Next, we deconstruct the uncaring cures that are hatched and imposed. Finally, we enact new and old ways for reweaving the fabric and restoring balance. However, we use the infinity sign to remind ourselves that balance is never restored forever. Semiotic transformation is the only constant when enacting interconnectedness. So how can we put this model into praxis? First, there is this meta project that we're calling Communicating in Place about planetary health and justice, in which we responded with our ridiculously not simple research question: how do we stay in touch while trying to figure out how to cure the world? With this dialogic mother-daughter multi-sided autoethnography. For this, we offer some photos. The first shows us staying in touch with real-life visits under viral threat, dancing at a proper social distance in Vermont, for example, and otherwise virtually through the digitally decomposing Zoom screen. Next, our own form of food interactivism. We gardened and shopped together, cooked and ate together when we were together, and we exchanged recipes and photos when we weren't. Me processing apples into sauce, Anna with our latest homemade gourmet meal. Finally, there are screenshots of our Google Drive as we developed our research framework for addressing our mutual concerns over personal health, climate crisis, and social injustice. Beyond that, you have references to my latest food interactivist research in the Marquesas, France, and Vermont, the 3 locations where I've been located during this period. Keeping the semiotic interfaces between the 3 systems of the triangle in mind as I research viral infection rates and regulations, difficulties with local global food production and distribution, and various sociopolitical tensions in each place. And then there's what my daughter's been up to.
I've been engaged in a concrete application of enacting interconnectedness in Amsterdam. I started a project called the Brain-Plant Interface, which aims to make our integration in and interdependence with the natural world emotionally intuitive by facilitating direct, non-hierarchical interspecies communication between human and plant. A few words on plant neurobiology. First, plants perceive with 15 to 20 distinct senses, including analogs of our 5. For example, they can respond with defense chemicals to the sound of a caterpillar munching a neighboring plant's leaf, as shown in the above photo. Second, plants recognize self and kin as evidenced by non-competitive behavior. For example, trees spurt above other tree branches to reach the sun, but not their own. And they compete with other trees' roots, except when they are the same species of tree, as shown in the above mangroves. Finally, plants conduct chemical conversations with symbiotic species through the air and with each other through their root mycelial networks, forming vast reciprocal communities, as shown in the bee pollinating the flower. So facilitating human-plant communication requires returning to our basic shared signaling language of action potentials, which are pulses of electricity that serve as the precursor to thoughts, emotions, and actions. The brain-plant interface captures human action potentials through EEG, shown above as brainwaves. It transmits these to plant leaves and captures the plant's action potential responses through MESR, shown above as electrodes on the plant. This response is then MIDI transformed into music for human ears, creating a loop, as shown by the person listening to headphones. By making plant language accessible to humans through technology, this interactivist project aims to expand people's definition of communication and intelligence, as well as providing an intuitive introduction to planetary thinking. The mobile installation, supported by the Dutch Creative Industries Fund, is free and open for everyone in public spaces. It touches on all three planetary health and justice systems. Ecologically, we aim to activate care for the natural ecosystems people embed their identities within and nurture more post-humanist decolonial ethics. Socially, we hope to enhance people's sense of belonging within their intermingled social and natural ecosystems, averting the loneliness of contemporary society. And personally, we hope people can regain knowledge about how to live most healthily within their ecosystems. By way of conclusion, we return to our meta findings on enacting interconnectedness. We think that an unconventional conference setting and extraordinary times calls for an unconventional ending. So yes, we made a model, but we also wrote a poetic text, and it goes like this. We enact interconnectedness. We call, we WhatsApp, we Skype, we Zoom, we hang out. We share knowledge and articles and videos in Google Docs. We share recipes and food photos. We share Spotify playlists. We learn to listen to what is already there in each other. We make models. We try not to reinvent the wheel. We go multimodal, multidisciplinary, multi-species. We find commonality in our approaches, topics, and beliefs. We find differences in our approaches, topics, and beliefs. We tell stories. We remember our history. We search for ways forward. We settle on interactivism, on biomimicry and cultural mimicry, on action experiments and alternative lifestyles, on Kate Raworth's donut economy model, which is supposed to help government and business enact interconnectedness. This Kate creates a new class on planetary health and justice. Anna creates an environmental, social, and governance program. We make calls to action. We make Google Slides. We make collaborative, pre-recorded videos on Zoom. We try to get it all in there. We upload to Raising Our Voices and wonder if anyone will even see this. We miss each other. We admire each other. We smile, we laugh, we cry. We blow virtual kisses. We stroke the webcam. We wonder when this will all be over and what comes next. Thanks for tuning in to our talk, and please feel free to reach out by email or join our talkback.